In the grand drama of Tudor England, where kings and queens have long dominated the spotlight, a cast of remarkable women lived in the shadows, mistresses whose stories have been whispered, overlooked, or erased altogether. These women were far more than mere footnotes to royal scandal. They were players in a complex game of power, survival, and influence. Behind closed doors and beneath the glittering veneer of courtly life, they shaped alliances, affected succession, and navigated treacherous political waters with a blend of cunning, resilience, and grace. Their lives reveal a hidden dimension of Tudor history, one that challenges our understanding of power, gender, and legacy in one of the most fascinating eras of England's past. In the grand tapestry of Tudor history, vibrant with monarchs, battles, and reforms, there exists a quieter, more shadowed narrative, one stitched not with crowns or laws, but with whispered names, veiled relationships, and unacknowledged influence. These are the untold stories of Tudor mistresses, women who shaped power from behind embroidered curtains and within the confines of whispered courtly conversations. Unlike queens whose lives are heavily documented, mistresses often operated in the blurred margins of the historical record. Yet their impact, on policy, succession, diplomacy, and even survival, was real even if history preferred to forget their names. The Tudor dynasty is often remembered through the lens of its larger-than-life monarchs, especially the infamous Henry VIII and the iconic Elizabeth I. Their reigns have dominated narratives of the period, and the women most frequently studied are usually queens: Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Parr. But beyond the glittering facade of royal marriages existed an entire undercurrent of influence and agency wielded by women without titles: mistresses, lovers, companions, and confidants. Some were noble-born and maneuvered shrewdly for power. Others were of modest means and found themselves entangled in the machinery of a court where desire and politics were inextricably linked. This video endeavors to illuminate the hidden lives of these women, not only those who shared beds with kings, but also those whose liaisons with nobles and power brokers influenced the politics of the realm. The term mistress during the Tudor period was not always synonymous with scandal or moral failing. In a court where every action could be loaded with political implication, intimate relationships could be tools of diplomacy, means of survival, or expressions of ambition. Mistresses were sometimes strategic agents, other times pawns in the game of noble families, and occasionally, they were simply women who fell in love or were swept into powerful orbits beyond their control. The methodology behind this exploration relies on the careful threading together of fragmented sources. Tudor mistresses rarely left autobiographies, and they were seldom the subjects of official chronicles unless scandal erupted. Their stories must be pieced together through letters, sometimes theirs, more often others about them, legal documents, ambassadorial dispatches, household accounts, and the testimonies of enemies and allies alike. In many cases, their legacies survive only in rumor, ambiguity, or the shadow of a powerful child born out of wedlock. Women's influence in the Tudor court was often deliberately hidden or forgotten. While kings might be praised or criticized for their mistresses, the women themselves were easily erased. Their reputations were shaped by others, by moralists, by jealous courtiers, or by political opponents. In a society steeped in religious transformation and patriarchal control, women's sexuality was not just private, it was a tool to be weaponized or silenced. And yet, mistresses mattered. Some, like Elizabeth Blunt, mother of Henry VIII's only acknowledged illegitimate son Henry Fitzroy, left tangible marks on the political landscape. Others, such as Mary Boleyn, may have altered the course of English history not just through her own liaisons with Henry VIII but by placing her family closer to the center of power. Outside the royal spotlight, the mistresses of dukes, bishops, and diplomats shaped alliances and carried secrets across borders. Their power was real, though often informal, unspoken, and dangerous to acknowledge. Power in Tudor England was not simply found in Parliament or on the battlefield. It was built in salons, in chambers, in letters. It passed through women who were rarely allowed to wield official authority, yet who could influence the decisions of men who did. The mistress then becomes a fascinating figure, simultaneously marginalized and central, scandalous and strategic, forgotten and unforgettable. She was a product of her time but also, sometimes, a manipulator of it. This exploration also seeks to push back against the simplistic tropes often used to describe these women: temptress, whore, seductress. These labels, so often applied by male chroniclers or Victorian historians, reduce complex figures to one-dimensional misrepresentations. In reality, many Tudor mistresses were highly educated, politically astute, and emotionally resilient. Others were victims of pressure or products of familial manipulation. In both cases, they navigated a world that was fundamentally hostile to female autonomy and carved out spaces, however precarious, for influence and survival. The story of Tudor mistresses is not just a footnote to the lives of men. It is an essential part of the Tudor world itself. These women bore children who sometimes entered the lines of series. They advised lovers who held military or religious power. They were courted by foreign ambassadors, watched by spies, and targeted in court rivalries. In some cases, they outlived their lovers and became figures of local authority or cultural patronage. Their lives were not static or shallow, they were deeply embedded in the web of Tudor society. This video is not an exercise in romantic scandal, though passion and betrayal will certainly feature. It is a reclamation. It is a challenge to the way history has traditionally been written and remembered. By lifting these women out of the shadows, we gain a fuller, more nuanced understanding of Tudor England, not just as a kingdom of kings and queens, but as a world of complex relationships, hidden power, and quiet revolution. The glittering courts of Tudor England were places of opulence, intrigue, and ruthless political ambition. Beneath the polished surface of ceremonies, banquets, and pageants lay a complex, often perilous hierarchy in which women played critical roles. Though the history of Tudor England has long been dominated by male sovereigns, politicians, and generals, it is impossible to fully understand the workings of court and crown without understanding the women who navigated its corridors: wives, queens, ladies-in-waiting, confidantes, and, in the shadows, mistresses. The Tudor court was not merely a backdrop to male power, it was a battlefield of female influence, reputation, and resilience. In 16th-century England, society was rigidly patriarchal, and women were expected to be chaste, obedient, and subordinate. Their value was measured by their familial alliances, childbearing capacity, and ability to maintain decorum. Yet, the court offered certain women an unusual kind of access to power. For aristocratic women, especially those who served in royal households, it was possible to exert real, if unofficial, influence through proximity to monarchs, diplomats, and nobles. Women at court filled essential roles. Some served as ladies-in-waiting to queens or princesses, attending to their personal and ceremonial needs. Others worked as maids of honor, young, unmarried noblewomen who were expected to be virtuous and charming, but whose presence was often as decorative as it was functional. These positions were both prestigious and dangerous. For some, they were stepping stones to advantageous marriages or even royal favor. For others, they were traps where a single misstep could mean disgrace, banishment, or worse. Within this hierarchy, women walked a fine line. On one hand, they were subject to intense scrutiny. Every gesture, look, or rumored relationship could shape their future. On the other, they wielded influence in ways that male courtiers sometimes could not. They passed information through whispered conversations, manipulated court factions through alliances and favors, and at times served as intermediaries between powerful men. To understand the world these women inhabited, it is necessary to define the labels often applied to them, terms that blur in meaning, yet define the boundaries of their roles. In Tudor court culture, a mistress was typically understood to be a woman engaged in a sexual relationship with a man of status, often a nobleman or monarch, outside of marriage. However, not all mistresses were scandalous or powerless. Some were widely acknowledged, even respected. Others were kept secret, their names barely recorded. A companion might be a close female associate, more intimate than a servant, but not necessarily a mistress. These women offered conversation, support, and often emotional intimacy. The line between companion and mistress could be ambiguous, especially when powerful men and ambitious families were involved. A confidante, meanwhile, was a woman trusted with secrets, political, emotional, or personal. She might be a friend, a relative, or a servant. Confidantes held dangerous power. With knowledge came influence, and with influence came risk. In Tudor England, to be too close to power could be fatal. These roles often overlapped. A mistress could be a confidante, a lady-in-waiting could become a lover, a queen's maid could betray her trust. The court was a labyrinth of shifting alliances, whispered secrets, and volatile ambition. Within this environment, women needed cunning, discretion, and luck to survive. Romance in the Tudor court was rarely a private matter. A love affair could mean elevation or ruin. Women at court had to understand that their personal relationships could, and likely would, be politicized. For some, becoming a nobleman's mistress was not merely an act of desire, it was a form of survival, a calculated risk that might lead to wealth, influence, or a marriage that would otherwise be impossible. In certain cases, families actively encouraged relationships with powerful men, viewing a daughter's seduction of a king or noble as a way to improve the family's standing. In this sense, love was entangled with strategy. A woman who caught the king's eye might become a conduit for patronage or titles. Her brothers might be knighted, her father granted lands. Yet love could also be genuine. The Tudor court, with its poetry, music, and rituals of courtly love, fostered a romantic culture where emotions ran high. But genuine affection did not shield women from the dangers of court politics. A woman who loved sincerely might be abandoned, betrayed, or used as a political scapegoat. More than one mistress learned that favor was fleeting and affection conditional. This blurring of the lines between love and strategy is a recurring theme in the stories of Tudor mistresses. The question was never just whom they loved, but why, when, and how that relationship could serve or destroy them. In the royal court, queens officially held the highest female position. Yet even they were not immune to the threat of mistresses. The presence of a royal mistress could humiliate a queen, undermine her authority, or destabilize her household. Tensions between queens and mistresses were not uncommon, and some queens actively worked to exile or discredit their rivals. Yet queens also relied on their own inner circles, ladies-in-waiting, maids and female allies, to protect their reputations and navigate court politics. These women were expected to uphold the queen's dignity, but they were also sometimes the first to fall into disgrace should scandal erupt. Ladies-in-waiting often found themselves in precarious positions. They were close to power yet subordinate to it. A flirtation with the king could elevate them, or doom them. Some, like Anne Boleyn, transitioned from maid to queen. Others were discarded, forgotten, or used to manipulate court politics without their consent. This dynamic created rivalries, jealousies, and shifting alliances. Women at court were not a unified bloc. They competed for favor, security, and protection. The presence of a concubine, whether royal or noble, was a disruptive force, capable of reshaping power structures within both the king's household and the wider court. Tudor England was deeply influenced by religious doctrine and social expectations surrounding female chastity and obedience. A woman's virtue was considered the cornerstone of her reputation. A scandal, real or rumored, could destroy her prospects for marriage or advancement. This double standard meant that while kings might boast of their lovers, the women involved were often blamed, shamed, or erased from the record. The Reformation added a further layer of complexity. As England broke from the Catholic Church under Henry VIII, the role of the monarchy became intertwined with moral leadership. Henry's multiple marriages and affairs caused immense controversy, and his mistresses, both acknowledged and rumored, were often caught in the crossfire of religious and political debate. Public opinion could be both ruthless and inconsistent. A mistress might be admired for her beauty and wit, yet condemned as a seductress or whore. Rumors spread quickly through the court, often manipulated by political factions. Morality was not just a private matter, it was a public weapon, wielded to destroy enemies or protect allies. Women learned to navigate these waters cautiously. They managed appearances, controlled gossip, and built alliances that could shield them from scandal. Still, many fell, often not because of what they did but because of who was watching. Anne Boleyn's rise is perhaps the most famous example of a courtier navigating the treacherous hierarchy of the Tudor court. Before she became Henry VIII's second wife and the mother of Elizabeth I, Anne was a lady-in-waiting in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon. Her journey from minor noblewoman to queen was unprecedented, and deeply controversial. Anne was not Henry's first mistress. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already had a liaison with the king, and some rumors suggested that their relationship may have continued even as he courted Anne. But unlike Mary, Anne refused to become a royal mistress in the conventional sense. She insisted on marriage, using her intelligence, charisma, and calculated resistance to elevate her position. What made Anne different was her political awareness. She aligned herself with the reformist faction at court, supported religious change, and recognized that marriage to the king would bring not only personal advancement but ideological influence. Her relationship with Henry was not merely romantic, it was strategic, shaping the very future of English religion and monarchy. Yet her ascent came at great cost. Her refusal to be merely a mistress earned her enemies, and her eventual fall, executed for adultery, incest, and treason, shows how precarious even the highest position could be for a woman who dared to seek power. Anne Boleyn's story encapsulates the paradox of the Tudor mistress, a figure of immense influence and yet one step from ruin. The Tudor court was a place of contradictions, where women were both ornamental and essential, praised for virtue yet punished for ambition. Within this hidden hierarchy, mistresses, companions, and confidants maneuvered through a maze of expectations, rivalries, and dangers. Some succeeded, becoming power brokers in their own right. Others were destroyed by the very forces they tried to control. Before the Tudors rose to power, the English monarchy had already seen centuries of royal affairs, liaisons, and mistresses whose influence reverberated through both courtly and national politics. To understand the complex role of mistresses during the Tudor dynasty, it is essential to look backward, into the late Plantagenet and Lancastrian courts, to trace the evolution of unofficial female influence and its impact on royal behavior, public perception, and governance. The concept of the royal mistress did not emerge in a vacuum. It was shaped by precedent, informed by scandal, and reacted to by cautious rulers like Henry VII, who understood the political volatility attached to personal relationships within the monarchy. Among these pre-Tudor figures, perhaps none stands out more vividly than Elizabeth Jane Shore, whose life and legacy act as a vital bridge between the world of the Plantagenets and the emerging Tudor age. The Plantagenet and Lancastrian courts were deeply embedded in a world of hereditary privilege, aristocratic factionalism, and dynastic insecurity. During the 14th and 15th centuries, the English monarchy oscillated between strength and instability, punctuated by long-standing conflicts such as the Hundred Years' War and internal power struggles, most notably the Wars of the Roses. Within these turbulent contexts, the personal lives of monarchs became politically charged terrain. A king's mistress was never just a lover, she was a potential confidant, patron, power broker, or scapegoat. The mistresses of English kings during this period, while not officially acknowledged in court protocols, wielded significant informal power that could affect noble appointments, influence foreign alliances, and stir public opinion. Royal mistresses in the late medieval period were often noblewomen or members of the gentry, strategically placed in the court as ladies-in-waiting or companions to the queen. Their proximity to power made them visible and vulnerable. The most successful among them balanced discretion with influence, cultivating their roles not only as lovers but as intermediaries between the king and various court factions. These women, by virtue of intimacy, often served as political advisors, sometimes more trusted than formal ministers. Their counsel could be decisive in moments of succession, war, or diplomacy. A significant example of such influence is Alice Perrers, the notorious mistress of Edward III. A former lady-in-waiting to Queen Philippa, Perrers became the king's lover in the last decades of his reign and accumulated enormous wealth and political influence. She intervened in legal cases, influenced patronage networks, and was resented by much of the political establishment. Her blatant use of position to enrich herself, and her interference in parliamentary affairs, ultimately led to her temporary banishment from court and a reputation for greed and corruption that lingered long after her fall. Yet even in disgrace, her example set a clear precedent. The king's mistress was a figure whose personal role could have public consequences. By the time of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York, England had seen the destructive potential of unchecked personal relationships at the center of power. The instability of this period made kings more susceptible to influence from their immediate circles. In such an environment, the mistress could serve as both a stabilizing presence and a lightning rod for controversy. She could become the king's shield from more formal pressures, or she could become the convenient target for those seeking to challenge the regime. It was during this fraught period that Elizabeth Jane Shore emerged as one of the most enduring and emblematic figures of late Plantagenet court life. Born around 1445 into a respectable merchant family, Elizabeth Shore was well educated and known for her intelligence and charm. She married William Shore, a wealthy London merchant, but their union was annulled, likely on the grounds of non-consummation, before she entered into a romantic relationship with King Edward IV. What set Jane Shore apart from many of her contemporaries was her capacity to blend beauty with political acumen. Unlike many other mistresses, she was widely liked not only by the king but also by other members of the court and even by some members of the general public. Jane Shore's influence during Edward IV's reign was significant, if not always overt. She reportedly used her position to intercede on behalf of petitioners, often showing clemency and generosity. Her ability to sway the king's opinion on matters of patronage or justice was well known, and while some contemporaries criticized her influence, others recognized her as a moderating force on a monarch known for political ruthlessness. Edward IV was no stranger to Machiavellian statecraft, and it is a testament to Shore's political instinct that she not only survived his reign but continued to play a role in courtly and political life after his death. After Edward IV died in 1483, the brief reign of his son Edward V was swiftly ended by the boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who declared the marriage of Edward IV invalid and took the throne as Richard III. In this transition, Jane Shore became a pawn in a broader political game. Richard III accused her of conspiring against him and imprisoned her for harlotry and alleged betrayal. She was forced to do public penance, walking through the streets of London barefoot in a white shift. This was intended as a humiliation, but it also solidified her public image as a victim of political persecution rather than a manipulative schemer. What makes Jane Shore's story particularly relevant to the early Tudor period is not only her enduring fame but the way her life was mythologized after the fact. Tudor chroniclers, especially those writing during the reign of Henry VII and Henry VIII, looked back on her as a symbol of both the dangers and virtues of informal female power. In some retellings she was a seductress responsible for the downfall of great men. In others she was a kind-hearted woman unjustly treated by a usurper. This dual narrative served the Tudors well. By portraying Richard III as a cruel tyrant who punished the innocent Jane Shore, Henry VII's regime reinforced its own legitimacy as a moral correction to Plantagenet corruption. Henry VII, the first Tudor king, was deeply conscious of the instability that had characterized the previous half-century. His approach to kingship was shaped by a desire to restore order, centralize authority, and limit the influence of factions at court, including those surrounding royal mistresses. While there is little evidence that Henry VII maintained any long-term mistresses in the way his successors would, his cautious behavior in personal relationships likely reflects the lessons learned from the late Plantagenet period. He understood that mistresses could become political liabilities. In a realm still healing from civil war, appearances mattered. Any whiff of impropriety or favoritism could be used by rivals to undermine his rule. Henry VII's marriage to Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV and niece by marriage to Jane Shore, was itself a masterstroke of political reconciliation. Through this union, he effectively ended the Wars of the Roses, uniting the warring houses of York and Lancaster. He also elevated the image of queenly virtue. Elizabeth was never embroiled in scandal. She was positioned as the ideal consort, fertile, loyal, and politically neutral. This carefully curated image allowed Henry VII to maintain tight control over his court, keeping romantic entanglements out of the political spotlight. Despite this conservative approach, the cultural memory of women like Jane Shore persisted. Her name appeared in plays, ballads, and poems well into the 17th century. She was invoked as a symbol of feminine beauty and moral ambiguity, often contrasted with virtuous queens or scheming mistresses. This enduring legacy reveals not just a fascination with her story, but a broader anxiety about female agency in a patriarchal society. Shore was a cautionary tale, a romantic heroine, and a political scapegoat all at once. Her story exemplified the dangers of female proximity to male power, and the way such proximity could be rewritten by history depending on who held the pen. By the time Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, the Tudor dynasty had a generation's worth of experience in managing royal image and minimizing scandal. Yet Henry VIII, unlike his father, would return to the older model of royal relationships, surrounding himself with mistresses, elevating lovers to positions of influence, and allowing his private desires to shape public policy. In doing so, he opened the door to a new era in which mistresses, once again, would become central to the court's political and social life. But he did so with the shadow of Jane Shore and other pre-Tudor women lingering in the background, a reminder of both the power and the peril of royal affection. The legacy of Plantagenet and Lancastrian mistresses thus served as both precedent and warning. They had shown how personal relationships could shape the fate of nations. They had demonstrated that mistresses could be peacemakers, power brokers, and scapegoats. And through figures like Jane Shore they provided a model, part myth, part memory, that the Tudors would alternately embrace, fear, and manipulate. Before the Tudors made mistresses into central characters of court life, their predecessors had already established the stage, and left behind a script that Henry VII and later his son would either revise or repeat. Henry VIII's reign is often remembered for his 6 marriages, yet his numerous extramarital affairs also played a significant role in shaping the political and social landscape of Tudor England. While some of his mistresses, like Anne Boleyn, have been extensively studied, others remain less well known, despite their considerable influence. These women navigated the treacherous waters of court life, where personal relationships could have profound political implications. Elizabeth Bessie Blount stands out as one of Henry's most prominent mistresses. Their affair began around 1514, during a period when Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was strained due to her inability to produce a male heir. Bessie, a maid of honor to the Queen, captivated Henry with her beauty and charm. In 1519 she gave birth to Henry Fitzroy, whom Henry acknowledged as his illegitimate son, a rare occurrence that underscored the importance of male succession. Fitzroy was later granted the title Duke of Richmond, indicating Henry's consideration of him as a potential heir. After their affair ended, Bessie married Gilbert Talboys and lived a relatively quiet life, though she remained connected to court through her son's upbringing. Her relationship with Henry highlighted the king's desperation for a male successor and foreshadowed the lengths he would go to secure the Tudor dynasty. Mary Boleyn, sister to Anne Boleyn, also had a significant, albeit less documented, relationship with Henry. Their affair likely began in the early 1520s, and while the exact duration is uncertain, it is believed to have overlapped with Henry's growing interest in Anne. Mary's time at the French court and her connections to European nobility made her a valuable asset in diplomatic circles. Speculation surrounds the paternity of her children, with some historians suggesting that Henry may have fathered one or both. Mary's later marriage to William Stafford, a man of lower status, led to her temporary exile from court, reflecting the precarious position of women who fell out of royal favor. Among the lesser-known figures, and Stafford, Lady Hastings, was rumored to have had an affair with Henry around 1510. As a member of the prominent Stafford family and sister to the Duke of Buckingham, Anne's alleged relationship with the king caused a scandal that disrupted court life. Though evidence is sparse, the mere rumor of such a liaison was enough to tarnish reputations and alter political alliances. Jane Popincourt, a French noblewoman and tutor at the English court, was another figure linked to Henry. Initially serving as a French tutor to Princesses Margaret and Mary, Jane later became a maid of honor to Queen Catherine of Aragon. Her close association with the Duke of Longueville, a French noble held at the English court, and subsequent rumors of an affair with Henry, led to her diminished standing. Eventually she returned to France, her reputation marred by court gossip. Margaret Madge Shelton, a cousin to Anne Boleyn, was reportedly Henry's mistress for a brief period around 1535. As a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne, Madge's involvement with the king added tension to an already strained royal marriage. Some historians suggest that it may have been her sister, Mary Shelton, who was involved with Henry, highlighting the confusion and intrigue that surrounded courtly relationships. Regardless, the Shelton family's proximity to the throne exemplified how noble families could gain or lose favor based on the personal relationships of their members. These affairs were not merely personal indiscretions. They had significant political ramifications. The women involved often came from influential families, and their relationships with the king could elevate their family's status or, conversely, lead to their downfall. Moreover, the possibility of producing a male heir made these liaisons matters of national importance. The court was a place where personal and political interests were deeply intertwined, and the king's mistresses were at the center of this nexus. The emotional toll on these women was considerable. They navigated a world where their value was often tied to their beauty, fertility, and ability to maintain the king's interest. Falling out of favor could result in exile, loss of status, or worse. Yet, some managed to leverage their positions to secure advantageous marriages or ensure the well-being of their children. Their stories reflect the complexities of court life and the limited agency afforded to women, even those close to the seat of power. In Tudor England, the bodies of women were often politicized, serving as tools for alliance building, succession, and the consolidation of power. Mistresses like Bessie Blount and Mary Boleyn were not just romantic partners. They were integral to the political machinations of the time. Their relationships with Henry VIII offer insight into the ways personal desires and political strategies were inextricably linked in the Tudor court. While history has often focused on Henry's queens, his mistresses played crucial roles in shaping the course of English history. Their lives, marked by ambition, vulnerability, and resilience, provide a more nuanced understanding of the Tudor era's intricate interplay between personal relationships and political power. In the intricate tapestry of Tudor England, the influence of noblemen's mistresses often operated behind the scenes, subtly shaping political, religious, and economic landscapes. These women, though not always officially acknowledged, wielded significant power through their relationships, correspondence, and patronage. Their roles extended beyond mere companionship, encompassing strategic alliances and cultural contributions that left lasting imprints on the era. One notable figure is Elizabeth Bess Holland, the long-term mistress of Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Their relationship, beginning around 1526, was a source of contention, particularly with Norfolk's wife, Elizabeth Stafford, who accused Bess of being a peasant's daughter and a former laundress in her household. Despite such claims, Bess's position was more nuanced. She served as a maid of honor to Anne Boleyn and maintained close ties with the Howard family, indicating a status beyond that of a mere servant. Her influence is further evidenced by an inventory of her possessions, which included valuable jewelry and luxurious clothing, reflecting her integration into the court's elite circles. Bess's presence at significant events, such as Queen Jane Seymour's funeral cortege in 1537, underscores her recognized role within the royal court. Frances Howard, Countess of Kildare, offers another example of a woman whose influence extended into the political and religious spheres. As a member of the prominent Howard family, Frances held positions of considerable responsibility, including serving as the governess to Princess Elizabeth Stuart, later Queen of Bohemia. Her appointment, despite opposition, signifies the trust placed in her capabilities and the importance of her role in shaping the future queen's upbringing. Frances's involvement in court affairs and her connections through marriage further amplified her influence, allowing her to navigate and impact the complex dynamics of Tudor politics and religion. Elizabeth Taleboys, Baroness Taleboys of Kyme, also exemplifies the subtle power wielded by noblewomen. As the daughter of Elizabeth Blunt, a former mistress of Henry VIII and Gilbert Taleboys, Elizabeth I inherited titles and estates that positioned her as a significant landowner. Her correspondence reveals a woman actively engaged in managing her affairs and asserting her rights, challenging the traditional expectations of women's roles during the period. Through her letters, Elizabeth demonstrated agency and influence, negotiating her position within the societal and political structures of the time. These women's contributions were not limited to their personal relationships. They extended into religious and economic patronage. Elizabeth Stafford, for instance, was a staunch supporter of the Catholic faith during a time of significant religious upheaval. Her patronage of religious institutions and scholars aligned with her beliefs, serving as a form of resistance against the Protestant Reformation and reinforcing the traditional religious structures within her sphere of influence. Similarly, the wealth and status acquired by women like Bess Holland enabled them to support artistic and religious endeavors, further embedding their influence within the cultural fabric of Tudor England. The mistresses of Tudor noblemen played multifaceted roles that extended beyond the private sphere. Through strategic relationships, correspondence, and patronage, they navigated the complexities of court life, exerting influence over political decisions, religious affiliations, and economic developments. Their quiet power, often overshadowed in historical narratives, was instrumental in shaping the course of Tudor history. In Tudor England, the royal court was not the only stage on which power and influence were exercised. Beyond the gilded walls of palaces and noble estates, a quieter but equally compelling drama unfolded among women of the merchant class in London's thriving urban centers. These women, many without noble blood or formal titles, wielded considerable influence through intellect, charm, cultural fluency, and strategic relationships with men in power. Mistresses outside the aristocracy, particularly those linked to poets, diplomats, and wealthy merchants, helped shape cultural discourse, political opinions, and even religious sentiment, often from the periphery of formal recognition. Unlike their noble counterparts, merchant-class mistresses and high-class courtesans were not cushioned by hereditary privilege. They operated within a society that was sharply hierarchical and deeply patriarchal, where legitimacy and lineage dictated social mobility. Yet some women used what tools were available to them, education, beauty, wit, and social intelligence, to make a place for themselves. Many of these women were connected to powerful men in the urban elite, men who served on guild councils, controlled ports and trade routes, or held sway over the printing presses and salons of intellectual London. The merchant class of the Tudor period was undergoing a transformation. As international trade expanded and cities like London grew in size and wealth, a new class of educated and affluent commoners emerged. Within this evolving social structure, some women found opportunities to engage with men of influence as companions, advisors, and lovers. Unlike aristocratic mistresses, whose roles were often constrained by dynastic politics, merchant-class mistresses operated in a more fluid social context. Their influence was more informal but no less significant. Many of these women were courtesans in the Renaissance sense of the word, women educated in languages, music, literature, and etiquette, capable of holding their own in salons and poetry circles. In some cases, these women acted as muses, collaborators, or even co-writers in literary productions. Their presence helped shape the aesthetic and intellectual currents of the time. Importantly, their influence was not limited to cultural life. It extended into commercial and even diplomatic affairs, especially when they were tied to powerful merchant brokers or diplomats. London's courtesans often lived in neighborhoods that served as commercial hubs, Southwark, Bankside and Clerkenwell among others. While some were independent women, others were attached to wealthier patrons who provided them with homes, income or protection in exchange for companionship and loyalty. These women were frequently educated, sometimes by nuns in their early years, or later through the patronage of men who prized their intelligence as much as their beauty. Unlike common prostitutes, courtesans held a paradoxical status, both condemned and admired, marginalized yet influential. Their secrets, particularly those whispered from the pillows of men in power, could affect reputations, business dealings and political strategies. Among the most intriguing case studies from this milieu is the unnamed mistress of Sir Thomas Wyatt. Wyatt, one of the earliest English Renaissance poets and a prominent courtier during Henry VIII's reign, was a man of deep intellect, artistic refinement and political cunning. Though he is perhaps best remembered for his complex relationship with Anne Boleyn, there are references in his poetry and correspondence to another woman, a mistress who remains unnamed in historical records but clearly played a significant role in his emotional and intellectual life. Some scholars speculate that this woman may have been a courtesan or a merchant's daughter, someone outside the bounds of the titled elite but capable of engaging with Wyatt on matters of poetry, politics and philosophy. The tone of Wyatt's poems, his sonnets and lyrics, suggests a deep respect and admiration for this woman's intellect and independence. She appears not simply as an object of desire but as a participant in dialogue, a partner in metaphorical and emotional exploration. In this way she echoes the archetype of the Renaissance muse, the woman who inspires and elevates the artist not only through physical beauty but through conversation, ideas and emotional insight. The presence of such a woman in Wyatt's work underscores the degree to which female influence could permeate even the most male-dominated spheres, provided the woman had the skill and subtlety to navigate them. The literary salons and poetry circles of Tudor London were dynamic spaces in which ideas were exchanged, reputations were built or broken, and alliances formed. Women who had the education and social poise to participate in these gatherings often found ways to influence the men who would go on to hold positions in court, parliament, or the church. Their presence in these intellectual circles was not always formalized, but it was real. They could steer conversations, recommend readings, connect patrons with poets or scholars, and even act as informal editors or critics. These contributions were rarely credited, but they were crucial. In such spaces, education became a powerful tool. The ability to read Latin or French, recite poetry, or engage in theological or philosophical debate could elevate a woman far beyond the station of her birth. In some instances, women gained this education in convents before the dissolution of the monasteries, and in others through the benevolence or pride of a patron. Regardless of how it was acquired, education allowed women to move in circles otherwise inaccessible to them and to exert influence over the men who moved policy and penned literature. Their impact also extended into the religious debates that were reshaping England. The Reformation brought with it not only shifts in doctrine but in the control of printing presses, the circulation of ideas, and the alignment of political factions. Women close to men of power, including merchants with printing connections or courtly reformers, could subtly shape religious discussions. Through private conversation, the selection of books shared among intimate circles, and the dissemination of ideas through poetry and correspondence, women influenced the ideological contours of the time. Economic power was another avenue. A mistress attached to a wealthy merchant could influence trade decisions, property acquisitions, or charitable donations. Some women even managed the households or businesses of their patrons, acquiring skills in administration and negotiation. In doing so, they not only gained autonomy but also built informal networks of influence that included artisans, merchants, and scholars. In a period when formal positions of power were almost entirely denied to women, these informal economies of influence mattered deeply. There is also evidence that these women sometimes acted as intercessors or informal diplomats. A well-connected woman could deliver messages, arrange discreet meetings, or provide a neutral space for sensitive discussions. In this capacity, they became trusted figures in negotiations and alliances. Their loyalty, discretion, and intelligence were valued assets, particularly in a culture where gossip could ruin careers and lives. This level of trust reveals just how deeply embedded some mistresses were in the political and social mechanisms of Tudor England. Their names, unfortunately, are often lost to history. Few of their letters survive, and their roles were rarely recorded in official documents. Yet their fingerprints are everywhere, in the verse of Wyatt, the patronage records of merchants, the shifting affiliations of religious thinkers, and the subtle currents of power that flowed through London's merchant houses and poetic gatherings. These women remind us that influence does not always come with a title or a place at the council table. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through whispered counsel, well-placed correspondence, or a line of verse that alters the way a man sees the world. Their stories also serve as a counterpoint to the grand narratives of queens and noblewomen. While the exploits of Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard are often written in bold strokes, the lives of these untitled women are drawn in fine lines. Yet those lines connect the dots of a society in flux, a society in which education, conversation, and subtlety could be as powerful as pedigree. They were women of influence without official recognition, shaping the cultural and political landscape from within the margins, and doing so with remarkable skill and resilience. The mistresses of the merchant class and London's intellectual circles challenge our assumptions about power in Tudor England. They illustrate that influence was not the sole domain of the aristocracy or clergy. It could be earned, built, and maintained through intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to speak, often softly, always cleverly, to those who held the levers of authority. These women may not have worn crowns or borne royal blood, but their impact was no less real, and their stories deserve to be told alongside those of queens and courtiers. In Tudor England, the roles of mistresses extended beyond romantic entanglements, often intertwining with espionage, political maneuvering, and social strategy. These women, frequently operating on the fringes of courtly life, navigated a complex landscape where personal relationships could serve as conduits for intelligence gathering and political influence. The distinction between sexual exploitation and strategic alliance was often blurred. While some women were coerced into relationships with powerful men, others leveraged these connections to gain access to information and influence. In certain cases, mistresses were instrumental in espionage activities, particularly during periods of heightened paranoia under Henry VIII. The king's fear of dissent and betrayal led to an environment where information was a valuable currency, and women close to influential figures were both assets and liabilities. Jane Dormer, for instance, exemplifies the dual role of women as confidantes and political actors. As a close companion to Queen Mary I, Dormer was privy to sensitive information and played a significant role in courtly affairs. Her marriage to Don Gomez Suarez de Figueroa, Duke of Feria, further entrenched her position within the political landscape, allowing her to act as a liaison between English and Spanish interests. Dormer's involvement in delivering Queen Mary's jewels to Elizabeth I after Mary's death underscores her trusted status and the delicate balance she maintained between personal loyalty and political pragmatism. Eleanor Mantell, though less documented, represents the experiences of many women who, while not officially recognized in historical records, were integral to the dissemination of information within and beyond the court. These women often found themselves in precarious positions, where their relationships could be manipulated for political gain, and their fates were contingent upon the shifting tides of favor and suspicion. The use of women as political pawns was a recurring theme in Tudor politics. Mistresses and female attendants were sometimes employed to extract information from foreign dignitaries or domestic rivals. Their intimate access to powerful men made them valuable assets in intelligence networks. However, once their utility waned or suspicions arose, these women were often discarded, their reputations tarnished, and their contributions forgotten. Women in these roles being used for intelligence gathering highlight the concealed methods employed during this era. They were expected to collect information through their intimate associations, a practice that, while unofficial, was tacitly acknowledged within the corridors of power. The reliance on such methods underscores the gendered dynamics of espionage and the exploitation of women's positions within patriarchal structures. The roles of mistresses in Tudor England were multifaceted, encompassing elements of personal agency, exploitation, and political utility. Their experiences reflect the complexities of navigating a society where gender and power intersected in ways that could both empower and endanger. The stories of women like Jane Dormer and Eleanor Mantell, along with countless others whose names have been lost to history, offer a nuanced understanding of the subtle yet significant impact women had on the political and social fabric of their time. In the court of Queen Elizabeth I, the dynamics of power, gender, and sexuality were intricately woven into the fabric of political life. Elizabeth's reign marked a significant shift in sexual politics and morality, influenced by her unique position as a female monarch in a patriarchal society. The era witnessed the cultivation of the cult of virginity, a strategic narrative that served both as a personal shield and a political tool. This narrative was not merely a reflection of personal chastity but a deliberate construction to reinforce her authority and maintain control over her court and kingdom. The cult of virginity, surrounding Elizabeth I, was a powerful form of propaganda. By presenting herself as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth aligned herself with the purity and sanctity associated with the Virgin Mary, thereby elevating her status beyond that of a mere mortal ruler. This image was meticulously crafted through portraits, literature, and public ceremonies, reinforcing her divine right to rule and deterring potential suitors who might threaten her autonomy. The portrayal of Elizabeth as a perpetual virgin was not only a personal choice but a political strategy to maintain power in a male-dominated society. However, the truth behind this cultivated image is subject to historical debate. While Elizabeth publicly maintained her virginity, her close relationships with male courtiers, particularly Robert Dudley, fueled rumors and speculation. Dudley, a childhood friend and lifelong favorite, shared an intimate bond with the Queen. Their relationship was the subject of court gossip, especially after the mysterious death of Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, in 1560. Despite the scandal, Elizabeth continued to favor Dudley, granting him titles and estates, and their closeness persisted until his death in 1588. The Queen's decision to remain unmarried despite numerous proposals was a calculated move to retain her independence and prevent foreign influence through marriage alliances. The presence of mistresses among Elizabeth's courtiers further complicated the court's dynamics. Robert Dudley's secret marriage to Lettice Knowles, Elizabeth's cousin, in 1578, was a significant breach of trust. Upon discovering the union, Elizabeth displaced Knowles from court, perceiving the marriage as a personal betrayal. Knowles, a prominent noblewoman, had previously been married to Walter Devereux, and her subsequent marriage to Dudley positioned her as a rival to the Queen. This rivalry was representative of the tensions within Elizabeth's inner circle, where personal relationships often intersected with political ambitions. The court was prevalent with female rivals competing for the Queen's favor, leading to a complex web of alliances and enmities. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were from noble families, navigated a delicate balance between serving the Queen and pursuing their own interests. The Queen's favoritism could elevate a courtier's status, but any perceived disloyalty or ambition could result in swift punishment. The case of Lettice Knowles illustrates the precarious position of women at court, where personal relationships could both empower and endanger. Elizabeth's own emotional entanglements were marked by a careful negotiation between personal desire and political necessity. Her refusal to marry was not indicative of a lack of suitors but a deliberate choice to avoid the loss of power that could accompany marriage. By remaining single, Elizabeth maintained control over her court and kingdom, using her marital status as a diplomatic tool in negotiations with foreign powers. Her emotional attachments, particularly to Robert Dudley, were managed within the confines of this strategy, allowing her to preserve her authority while navigating the expectations of her role as queen. The court of Elizabeth I was a complex arena where sexual politics, personal relationships, and political power were deeply intertwined. The Queen's cultivation of the cult of virginity served as both a personal defense and a political strategy, enabling her to navigate the challenges of female sovereignty in a patriarchal society. The presence of mistresses and female rivals within her court further complicated these dynamics, highlighting the intricate interplay between gender, power, and personal ambition during the Elizabethan era. In the intricate web of Tudor diplomacy, foreign mistresses played pivotal roles that extended far beyond romantic liaisons. These women, often originating from continental Europe, were not merely companions to powerful men but active participants in the political and espionage activities of the time. Their unique positions allowed them to influence decisions, gather intelligence, and navigate the treacherous waters of international relations. The Tudor court was a melting pot of cultures, with French and Spanish courtesans frequently present due to the political alliances and rivalries of the era. These women brought with them the sophistication and intrigue of their homelands, often serving as informal diplomats. Their relationships with English nobles and royals were not solely based on affection but were strategic, aimed at securing favor and advancing their country's interests. One notable example is the influence of French courtesans during the reign of Henry VIII. The presence of these women at court coincided with periods of intense negotiation between England and France. Their intimate connections with key figures provided them with access to sensitive information, which could be relayed back to their homeland, thus serving as a form of espionage. This practice was not unique to the French. Spanish courtesans also played similar roles, leveraging their relationships to gather intelligence and sway political decisions in favor of Spain. Diplomats of the period were acutely aware of the potential advantages offered by these relationships. Mistresses could be used to extract information from rivals or to plant misinformation. Their ability to move within different social circles made them ideal for such tasks. Furthermore, their influence over powerful men meant they could advocate for certain policies or decisions, effectively acting as unofficial ambassadors for their countries. The role of mistresses in espionage and negotiation was not limited to their interactions with English figures. They also served as intermediaries between foreign powers. Their unique positions allowed them to facilitate communication and negotiations that might have been impossible through official channels. This was particularly important in an era where formal diplomatic relations were often strained or non-existent. The use of mistresses in such capacities was a double-edged sword. While they could be valuable assets, their loyalties were often questioned, and their positions were precarious. A mistress who was perceived to be too influential or whose loyalties were suspect could quickly fall out of favor, leading to personal and political repercussions. Despite these risks, many women navigated these challenges successfully, leaving a lasting impact on the political landscape of the Tudor period. The stories of these women highlight the complex interplay between personal relationships and political power during the Tudor era. Their contributions to diplomacy and espionage underscore the multifaceted roles women played in shaping the course of history, often operating behind the scenes yet wielding significant influence. In Tudor England, the existence of illegitimate children born to powerful men was a subject of intrigue, speculation, and political consequence. These offspring, often referred to as children of the shadows, occupied a complex space within the social hierarchy, their lives shaped by the circumstances of their birth and the discretion of their fathers. While some were acknowledged and integrated into noble circles, others remained hidden, their identities obscured to protect reputations and maintain political stability. One of the most prominent examples of an acknowledged illegitimate child is Henry Fitzroy, the son of King Henry VIII and his mistress Elizabeth Blount. Born in 1519, Fitzroy was granted the titles of Duke of Richmond and Somerset, reflecting his father's recognition and favor. His elevation to such positions of power fueled speculation about his potential role in the royal succession, especially during periods when Henry VIII lacked a legitimate male heir. Although Fitzroy was never officially legitimized, his status underscored the king's desire to secure his dynasty and the lengths he would go to assert his authority. Fitzroy's untimely death at the age of 17 curtailed any further ambitions for his inclusion in the line of succession, yet his existence left a permanent mark on the Tudor court and its politics. Beyond Fitzroy, the paternity of other children born to women associated with Henry VIII has been a topic of historical debate. Mary Bullen, sister to Anne Bullen, bore two children, Catherine and Henry Carey, during her marriage to William Carey. Given Mary's affair with the king, some historians have posited that these children may have been fathered by Henry VIII. While there is no definitive evidence to confirm this, the king's provision of grants and positions to the Carey family, as well as the close relationship between the Careys and Queen Elizabeth I, has been cited as circumstantial support for this claim. The possibility of royal blood in the Carey line adds a layer of complexity to the understanding of Tudor lineage and the subtle ways in which illegitimate offspring could influence the course of history. The phenomenon of illegitimate children was not confined to the royal family. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk and close confidant of Henry VIII, fathered several children outside of his marriages. These offspring, while not always publicly acknowledged, were sometimes integrated into noble society, their status contingent upon their father's favor and the political climate. The existence of such children illustrates the broader pattern among the nobility of maintaining extramarital relationships and the resulting progeny, who occupied ambiguous positions within the social hierarchy. The presence of illegitimate children within noble families had implications for inheritance and the transmission of titles and estates. While laws and customs generally favored legitimate heirs, the acknowledgement and support of illegitimate offspring could alter the distribution of wealth and power. In some cases, these children were granted lands, titles, or positions, effectively integrating them into the aristocracy. Such practices could lead to the quiet alteration of noble bloodlines, with the descendants of illegitimate children eventually becoming indistinguishable from those of legitimate birth. In recent years, advances in DNA analysis have opened new avenues for exploring the lineage of historical figures. Genetic testing has the potential to confirm or refute claims of paternity, providing a scientific basis for understanding familial relationships that were previously shrouded in mystery. For descendants of families like the Careys or the Brandons, DNA studies offer the possibility of uncovering connections to royal or noble ancestors, reshaping our understanding of history and heritage. These developments underscore the enduring impact of illegitimate children on the fabric of society and the importance of acknowledging their roles in shaping the past. The stories of these children of the shadows reveal the complexities of lineage, legitimacy, and power in Tudor England. Their lives, often marked by ambiguity and discretion, reflect the intricate interplay between personal relationships and political considerations. As history continues to be re-examined through new methodologies and perspectives, the contributions and experiences of these individuals are gaining recognition, offering a more nuanced understanding of the era and its social dynamics. The stories of Tudor mistresses, women who navigated the perilous intersections of power, gender, and politics, have often been erased, minimized, or distorted over time. For centuries, history tended to focus on kings, queens, and noblemen, relegating these women to the margins or reducing them to scandalous footnotes. Their contributions, influences, and complex lives were overshadowed by dominant narratives that prioritized male authority and lineage. This erasure reflects broader societal tendencies to overlook or diminish the roles of women, especially those whose power was exercised outside official structures or in unconventional ways. Many of these mistresses lived in the shadows, both literally and metaphorically, because their influence was informal, often operating behind closed doors or in whispered conversations. The secrecy surrounding their roles contributed to a lack of documentation and official acknowledgement. Historians of earlier centuries frequently dismissed their significance or framed them through moralistic judgments that obscured their agency. As a result, a rich, intricate part of Tudor history was neglected, lost beneath layers of silence and scandal. In recent decades, however, there has been a significant shift in how historians approach these women. Modern reassessments, propelled by feminist historiography, have sought to recover and reframe their stories with nuance and respect. Feminist scholars argue that understanding the full scope of Tudor politics requires acknowledging the ways in which women exerted power, often indirectly, through personal relationships, patronage, and cultural influence. Rather than viewing mistresses solely as seductresses or victims, contemporary historiography highlights their strategic decisions, political savvy, and the subtle forms of resistance they employed within a male-dominated system. This modern lens also critiques the moralistic and sensationalist portrayals that have long shaped popular perceptions. Historical fiction, drama, and even some academic works have sometimes sensationalized the lives of Tudor mistresses, emphasized their sexuality, or framed their narratives as cautionary tales. While these portrayals capture the imagination, they often distort the documented realities of these women's lives. The tendency to conflate personal morality with political legitimacy has obscured the complex social and political roles mistresses played. Feminist historians challenge this by emphasizing context, examining how societal constraints, gender norms, and political exigencies shape their choices and fates. The survival of the reputations of these women is also a study in contrast. For some, silence has been a tool of preservation. By remaining unspoken or unrecorded, their stories avoided the harsh judgments or criticism that public scandal could bring. In other cases, reputations were deliberately constructed or manipulated to serve political ends, either to enhance a queen's image by diminishing the influence of rivals or to discredit political opponents. This complex relationship with reputation means that some mistresses became symbols or stereotypes, their real lives obscured by layers of myth and political narrative. Despite this, the legacy of Tudor mistresses endures in literature, film, and popular history, often in hybrid forms that mix fact and fiction. Novels, plays, and television dramas have revived interest in these figures, sometimes bringing attention to previously overlooked stories. While creative works have the freedom to imagine and dramatize, they also influence public understanding and cultural memory. As a result, the portrayals of Tudor mistresses continue to shape how history is remembered and discussed, blurring the lines between documented reality and myth. The influence of these women extends beyond historical accounts to inform contemporary discussions about gender, power, and representation. Their lives challenge simplistic narratives about female agency in historical contexts, revealing how women navigated systems that limited their formal authority but did not entirely preclude influence. By examining the lives of Tudor mistresses through both historical and cultural lenses, we gain insight into the ways women have historically carved out spaces of power and presence, even when official history sought to silence them. The legacy of Tudor mistresses is a testament to the resilience and complexity of women's roles in history. Their stories, once marginalized or distorted, are being reclaimed and reassessed, enriching our understanding of the Tudor era and its social fabric. This process not only recovers lost histories but also invites us to question how history is written, whose stories are told, and how gender shapes the narratives we inherit. Through this evolving historiography and cultural reflection, the voices of these women, once relegated to the shadows, are finally being brought into the light. Throughout history, the lives of Tudor mistresses have often been relegated to the margins, overshadowed by the more visible narratives of kings and queens. Yet, as we reconsider these women's stories, a new understanding emerges, one that reframes history by recognizing their significant, if sometimes covert, roles in shaping politics, culture, and power during the Tudor era. This reframing is not just an academic exercise, it is a vital act of reclaiming voices that have long been silenced or dismissed, revealing the complex interplay of agency, vulnerability, and influence that characterize these women's lives. One of the most striking aspects of Tudor mistresses is the paradox of power and invisibility that define their existence. Though they often wielded considerable influence, whether through intimate relationships with monarchs, ties to noble families, or participation in court intrigue, their power was typically informal and precarious. They operated outside official structures of authority, navigating a landscape where their worth was frequently measured in terms of beauty, favor, or discretion rather than legal rights or titles. This invisibility was both a safeguard and a constraint. On one hand, remaining in the shadows protected them from the harshest political reprisals or social ostracism that could accompany public acknowledgement. On the other, it limited their ability to secure lasting power or recognition, often leaving their legacies vulnerable to erasure or distortion. This paradox illuminates the dual nature of their agency. While Tudor mistresses did not hold formal positions, many exercised remarkable resilience and strategic acumen. They negotiated personal survival and political advantage with deftness, using their proximity to power to advocate for themselves, their families, and sometimes broader political causes. Their lives were marked by a constant balancing act, cultivating favor without overstepping boundaries, wielding influence without provoking fatal backlash. This delicate navigation required intelligence, wit, and adaptability, qualities that modern historical perspectives increasingly highlight as central to understanding their true roles. Moreover, the experiences of these women complicate traditional narratives about gender and power. Their stories challenge simplistic assumptions that women in the Tudor era were uniformly powerless or passive. Instead, mistresses embodied a nuanced form of female agency, often operating within, and subtly reshaping, the confines imposed by patriarchal society. They could be patrons of the arts, facilitators of diplomacy, and players in political machinations. Though their influence was sometimes ephemeral, it was nevertheless significant, affecting succession disputes, court alliances, and international relations. Recognizing this complexity enriches our grasp of Tudor history and broadens our appreciation for the diverse ways women have exercised power throughout history. The legacy of Tudor mistresses also invites reflection on how history is constructed and whose stories are deemed worthy of remembrance. For centuries, prevailing historical accounts have marginalized these women, framing them through moralistic or sensationalist lenses that often obscured their full humanity and contributions. By revisiting their lives with scholarly rigor and empathy, historians contribute to a more inclusive and accurate portrayal of the past. This process of reclamation underscores the importance of questioning dominant narratives and uncovering the voices that have been sidelined by traditional historiography. In reclaiming the stories of Tudor mistresses, we not only recover lost histories but also gain insight into broader themes of power, gender, and identity that resonate beyond the Tudor period. Their lives speak to the enduring challenges faced by women who seek agency within restrictive social structures. They remind us that influence can take many forms and that power is not always visible or formally recognized. By honoring their resilience and complexity, we challenge contemporary readers to reconsider assumptions about leadership, legitimacy, and historical significance. Finally, reflecting on the legacies of Tudor mistresses offers a poignant reminder of the human dimension behind political history. These were real women, often young, vulnerable, yet courageous, whose choices and experiences shaped the course of their times in ways both subtle and profound. Their stories of love, ambition, survival, and sometimes tragedy add depth and texture to our understanding of the Tudor era. By reclaiming their voices, we enrich the historical tapestry and ensure that future generations appreciate the full spectrum of actors who influenced one of history's most fascinating periods. The lives of Tudor mistresses compel us to rethink history not merely as a record of rulers and battles but as a mosaic of human experiences marked by complexity and contradiction. Through their agency, resilience, and enduring legacies, these women transcend the confines of their era, inviting us to acknowledge the power of those who have been forgotten and to celebrate the diverse ways in which influence and authority have been exercised throughout history. Reclaiming their stories is an act of justice, a restoration of voices once silenced, and a testament to the enduring impact of women who lived in the shadows yet shaped the throne.